Test it. I got no mic.
Yeah, it's quiet in here.
Okay.
Okay, we're good.
All right.
Whenever you're ready.
So once again, I'll call the work session for the Oregon City Commission to order. Get my agenda since I don't have a printed one.
Roll call.
Does anybody have future agenda items? Seeing none. Discussion items, the equitable housing project update. Who is that? Is it Ms. Turway?
Thank you very much. Pete Walter, our planner with the city, is the project manager for the project.
Hi, can we pull up the PowerPoint, please?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you an overview and update of the equitable housing project. We had our public works session last night, so I can give you a brief update on that after I've given you this presentation. The equitable housing goal and why we're here is to increase equitable housing options throughout the city in existing and new neighborhoods to provide diverse, quality, physically accessible, and affordable housing choices with access to opportunities, services, and amenities. So we're really talking about more housing, more variety of housing, more affordable housing, and more amenities near housing. So it's not just limited to what we would consider traditionally publicly funded affordable housing, but public and private housing at a variety of price levels that meets families' needs. So we're talking about things such as proximity to transit, schools, childcare, foods, and parks. The problem isn't simply that existing housing doesn't meet the needs of Oregon City families. We have limited housing choices with some of the members of the community experiencing homelessness. The goal of this project is focused on the supply side to encourage housing development by removing regulatory barriers. We're specifically targeting barriers to more equitable housing and varied housing types to support development of robust alternatives. We're not just focusing on more housing per se or providing financial support with this project. With limited funds, we are targeting regulations. And with the idea that improvements would be applied to all future development proposed in the city. Would like to speak to the homelessness issue though. We're experiencing increasing homelessness. The 2017 count of Clackamas County counted 322 individuals experiencing homelessness in Oregon City, and 186 of those were under 18. And the school district has seen a huge increase in the homeless student population in 10 years. And the top reasons cited for that are rents that are too high, unemployment, and eviction. And that's why the City Commission has made this an issue. So I wanted to differentiate between what is in the scope of this project and what we really need to talk about as part of future ideas. Since this is a development code oriented project, what is within the scope of this project includes such things as what I'm going to talk about later, but a variety of non-traditional residential options that are not currently allowed in any residential zones. Currently, that includes manufactured home parks, recreational vehicles, tiny home villages, and campgrounds for transitional housing. So we would need to consider with these examples as to whether they're appropriate for Oregon City and whether there's the locations that are right for them. With tiny homes, currently those are kind of a limbo area in terms of regulation. They're somewhere between a recreational vehicle, a single-family home, and a manufactured house. And the building codes for those are still being worked out. So our recommendation as a result of this process is to look at tiny homes as part of a housing type as a future agenda item. The Oregon revised statutes do allow cities to establish campgrounds for what's called transitional housing within urban growth boundaries. Those could be permitted as an accessory use to a faith-based religious land use that's already in the city. By expanding the definition of religious land use pursuant to what's called RLUPA, or the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. But we have a lot of churches in the city, and some of those churches have expressed an interest in this issue. And the campgrounds could be regulated as a separate use category. The other things that we want to talk about are emergency shelters or warming shelters. These would be considered as potentially as a lodging type, like a hotel in any mixed use or commercial zone, rather than having to declare an emergency and suspend the zoning code to respond to these issues. We would really look at them as a similar type of use to a hotel. And again, that could also be an ancillary use to a religious land use. And we have done that already as a city, but through an emergency resolution. One other idea is to amend the bed and breakfast definition to include warming shelters. Currently, a bed and breakfast is a conditional use for less than 30 days. Anything more than 30 days is considered just normal, household. So, and those are some of the more unique approaches that could potentially be considered within the scope of this project. Additional ideas that are not within the scope of this project that could address housing and homelessness include inclusionary zoning, which is where you require certain projects over a certain size to provide affordable housing. And that does create some issues in terms of trying to regulate the housing market, as a small local government with small administrative capabilities. That can be a bit of a problem, but we could discuss that. One of the ideas is to track, regulate, and tax short-term rentals. Depending on what type of community you are, short-term rentals can have either a positive effect or a negative effect on your housing. We're not going to be talking about system development charges with this project because the public infrastructure impacts of land use, is a huge issue. And we have very detailed and comprehensive studies to support our current SDC structure. However, there are definitely some housing types which might benefit from a more scalable system development charge structure. Other options are what other communities have done, which is to build homes and projects on public land with public and private partnerships. I talked about tiny homes. We do have examples in the community of land trusts, like Juneberry Lane. That's 12 units, but it's the only one that I'm aware of in the city. So, yeah. Partnerships with Clackamas County Housing Authority. They are part of our technical advisory team. And rental assistance, regulation of no-cause evictions. Those kinds of things are policy questions that are outside the zoning code. Finally, support and expand the efforts of the police department's homeless liaison officer, who's doing a great job. There are probably other ideas that I haven't gotten to see. So the big ideas that we're considering at the moment are these 5 bullet points. We're going to dive into these. The first bullet point is to expand what's called the missing middle housing in our low and medium density zones. We'd also look at expanding housing types while maintaining density in our high density zones, continuing to allow multifamily residential in our mixed use and commercial zones, and coordinating the design and improvement requirements for residential development, and providing informational resources. So missing middle means increasing the diversity of housing types beyond single-family detached and multifamily. So on either end of the spectrum here, you've got our traditional housing stock, but in the middle, you've got a variety of different housing types, from duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, multiplexes, and live works. This is a table that really simplifies what we're trying to do. It's conveying a lot of information on a small chart, but First of all, nothing would change with existing single-family zones. It would still be allowed in all zones, but we're increasing the variety of housing types across all the zones, and the letters in orange represent new housing types and the zones within which they would be allowed. That would increase choice for property owners and for residents seeking a house that meets their needs and budgets. And to manage that mix of housing types, there would be a variety of dimensional and design standards proposed for each type. And you may see a lot of overlap between these types.
I thought we had an R2 zone.
We do. Yeah, that's our multifamily zone. But that's a high-density zone, so I'm just talking about the low and medium-density zones first. Yeah, sorry.
Question, it looks like most of the options are available on the R5 and the R3.5 zoning types. How much vacant land do we have in those types? I mean, is it a big supply or is it limited?
That's a really good question. So that's considered medium density, and most of our concept plan areas have that residential designation in addition to low and mixed use. So the R5 zone was created basically to implement the concept plan areas in the South End and Park Place. And as we move forward with the zoning implementation in Beaver Creek, some adaptation of the R5 zone would be usable there. So it's not so much an infill type zone, it's currently in the code, but not on the map.
I see.
If that makes sense. Okay. So as we go through this, I'd like to ask you, what aspects of these concepts do you support and what aspects would you change? So as I mentioned, we're not really making any changes to single-family residential. It's still the primary form of housing. It constitutes 70% of the housing stock in Oregon City. What we're talking about is providing opportunities to go beyond this housing type and offer more options within this housing type. Something that we already have in our code is provisions for accessory dwelling units. These can be attached, detached, inside a house, converting a garage, that sort of thing. And there are, what we've said, 9,000 opportunities already in the city for people to do accessory dwelling units, but only about 23 have been constructed and issued permits.
But we don't offer any incentives for ADUs.
Well, they have a lesser SDC than an apartment unit, I believe, slightly. Or is it? It's about $15,000. So what we would be doing, what we are doing.
That's about the cost of an ADU.
Yeah. For system development charge. The construction cost and accessory dwelling units varies, and we've put together a brochure that talks about the costs of various types of ADUs that have been constructed. From the simplest ones, which is conversion of a garage, to doing a detached full-size accessory dwelling unit. Point of these is that they are smaller than a typical single-family house, but they offer opportunities to either offset your mortgage or use as a rental unit and that kind of thing. Currently, our code requires owner occupancy, and one of the ideas is that that's an impediment to construction.
In one of the buildings, right?
In either of the main unit or the accessory unit. And the proposal is to do away with that because there's no similar requirement in any other type of housing. And that's what they proposed in other places, and it's considered a bit of a barrier.
Well, it seems to me that if we want to encourage, especially this type, that we need to take a serious look at the system development charges for this particular type. I know Portland has, I don't know if they completely waived them, but they dramatically reduced or waived the system development charges for accessory dwelling units. And, I mean, if we want to encourage especially more smaller rental units in Oregon City, which is obviously, one of the impediments to having housing, is having something that's, cost effective for someone who is on the lower income scale. That's one way to get to there, is to not, to convert a garage probably is, in the neighborhood of $30,000. And if you're adding half of that cost on for system development charges, you know, that's a pretty serious hit. So it seems to me that that's something we should definitely take a look at.
I'd like to add to the mayor's argument on that. I did attend the workshop, and it was very interesting. Thank you for doing that. But one of the things I noted was that a lot of these houses were originally occupied when they were built by 4, 5, 6 people. And now a lot of these houses maybe have a couple in them. And the systems have been built in these established neighborhoods for a long time to accommodate these larger family sizes. So why are we charging more to develop a system that's accommodating fewer people?
Right. Yeah, that's been raised as well. Yeah, I think, and it's a really good point. And in Portland, they have waived the SDCs and seen a resultant increase in building. So
And then in McLaughlin, in probably must have been the 30s or 40s, many of those large homes were converted to, you know, 4plexes or 6plexes. And you know, over the last 20 years, a lot of those have been reconverted back to single-family housing, but we ought to have the opportunity for people especially in the McLaughlin district where it's historically happened, to be able to, you know, convert into a, you know, multifamily kind of apartment kind of situation where the buildings are able to accommodate that.
The one thing about especially the detached ADU is that to make it compatible with the neighborhood. So in terms of design, color, materials, and then also to be respectful about setbacks so that someone that is abutting that property doesn't have somebody looking right into their
Well, if you're talking about building something from scratch
Right, if you're,
versus converting a garage or something like
Correct.
that. Yeah, okay.
So the other question we wanted to ask you is, we're talking about allowing up to 2 accessory dwelling units instead of just one, and one could be detached and the other would have to be detached if they were going to do that. It wouldn't necessarily mean that people are going to take advantage of that, because once you get over a certain number, you know, you're looking at some pretty significant construction costs, but it does create additional incentives.
I'd want to have more discussion with more people about adding more than one.
Okay.
So they still have to meet the setback requirements of a single-family residence if they put an ADU like in their backyard. Is that correct? They still got to meet rear yard, side yard setbacks.
If they're still an accessory structure, so they have accessory structure setbacks and requirements.
So that's beyond, because normally your accessory buildings are what, 200 square feet?
Yeah,
and
so
now
you'd go down to 3 feet with an accessory structure, but we are looking at design standards that would assure compatibility if it's going to be a dwelling unit.
They're less than a typical single family,
Yeah,
the setbacks.
yeah, they'll last.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's good, but then if you get into a 2-story unit and stuff like that, then you're going to get into the pushback of the neighbors
Right.
that you've got a 2-story ADU overlooking and all that stuff, so,
Yeah, so as you go up in height, potentially the setbacks get bigger.
okay.
Yeah. It's a very similar idea to an ADU is an internal conversion. We've determined that about half of housing stock was built before 1990, and this would allow you to convert an existing house into up to 4 units. That would help to incent preservation of an existing house and using it more efficiently. This is similar to what you would see in the McLaughlin district in certain places. You can think of it as a duplex retrofit, but it's unlikely that it would be used for more than 2 units because of commercial building codes that kick in after two units.
How do you control that, Pete? You know, somebody's going to go, hey, I just put another bathroom in my house, and I'm going to call it a duplex, and I'm going to get these ADU credits or whatever. So how do you control that? Are somebody physically going in and just seeing who's living there or what?
Well, there's building code requires it be a fully contained unit with permanent cooking facilities. So if if they put a stove in, or cook, you know, on a 220 outlet or something like that, gas line, that makes it subject to, you know, all sorts of building code requirements. We're not necessarily going to know if someone does that, if they.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, but we have done code enforcement on this type of thing in the past and resolved it. In order to assure that somebody doesn't scrape off an existing house that's perfectly good, if you were to do an expansion to a house to accommodate an ADU, an internal conversion, we limit it to 800 square feet. And so it gets a little bit vague between what's an accessory dwelling unit and what's an internal conversion. But this conversion option provides for an equal-sized dwelling rather than one being smaller and accessory. So,
I really like this option. I think, you know, it preserves the look and feel of the neighborhood, but gives some income opportunity for the property owner, as well as additional affordable units for someone else. This would be my favorite option, and ADUs would be right behind it.
okay. Anything you would change?
As long as it's safe
Yeah.
and
This is an idea. The corner duplex would be a permitted use in all low-density and medium-density zones with one door facing each street. You'd have to have a slightly larger lot to accommodate this, but you have no more visual impact than a single-family home. Reduces the cost of sharing a lot and having two streets with sidewalk improvements and that sort of thing.
So is this new construction then, Pete, this whole thing, or what are you talking about here? I mean, this looks like, you know, we're gonna build a new duplex, so it's a multifamily,
Well,
it's not an ADU now, right?
If you took advantage of this, it could be in a single-family residential zone. It wouldn't be an ADU. It would be a new dwelling unit type. And
Okay.
it would not limit it in size to 600 square feet. But it does have design standards associated with it. And I think what we're saying is that your lot has to be at least 25% larger than the minimum lot size. Yeah, in
would
order to-
the two components of the duplex be owned, or would like one be owned and the other leased, or?
Owner occupancy, we haven't really.
Because
we're
it's
not
on one
recommending
lot,
that.
right?
Yeah, it's on one lot, but it would probably be under one owner, yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's no reason you couldn't,
Have two tenants in it.
Yeah.
well, there's also no reason you couldn't set it up like a condominium where,
Condominium, yeah.
you know, each
on the
each
building.
person would own their own half of the building.
Yeah, you could do that. Air
But
rights.
this is an idea that would work in some of those spaces where we're talking about having oversized lots in lot averaging situation where a builder might want to go ahead and build something like this and either retain it themselves or sell it off to a property management company. But then we get, you know, more density on the same lot sizes.
Right. And you could retrofit an existing neighborhood, or you could use it in a new subdivision. Yeah. Duplexes allowed in some single-family zones now, and the proposal is to allow them in the medium-density residential zones as a way to increase the number of units on a single lot. So that would be in the R5 zone as well.
So this wouldn't impact R10, R8, or R6?
No.
So what is McLaughlin?
It's a mixture of R6 and R3.5.
Mainly R6, but they're on lot sizes that are 5,000 square feet because they're old plats.
Old
So
plat,
when
yeah.
I was living down on Monroe Street, they built a fourplex on 12th at Monroe.
Is that kind of near Atkinson Park?
Yeah.
No, it's just down from the high.
There are
from
some
the old high
pockets of
school.
mixed use as well, and I think that was one of
Okay.
them. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It was there was a fire damaged one that got rebuilt as well.
Right.
Yeah. Townhomes, very popular option, or townhouse. Allows for both affordability and home ownership or rentals. We would add new design standards for this, because we currently don't have a townhouse design standard. Structured around.
But we built a bunch of them.
Yeah, we do. It went through site plan and design review because they were in the R2 zone, so we had those.
So that stuff that got built up by the high school that stopped for a bunch of years and then finally got done was in the R2 zone?
Yeah, and
Okay.
the current code does not allow townhomes in the R2 zone. We're proposing bringing it back as an allowed use.
So then in an R2 zone in townhouses, how many units could you get on an acre?
Let's see, 2,000, so.
That's roughly 21 point
21.
something,
21.8
21.8 units per acre or something like that.
So we used to allow townhomes in R2, and then we got things like around Caulfield, around Two's Pond, there's all that it was zoned R2, but you saw those townhomes, and then near the high school as well. So we were afraid that all of the R2 land would be taken up with townhomes, which would be a little bit more expensive. So now this approach allows multiple housing types. You could do a traditional multifamily in R2, or you can do townhome in R2, but the density would be the same. And so your overall density doesn't change, it's just your housing type may change.
So, and I'm just trying to get this or wrap my head around this. So in a traditional R2 multifamily development, we're talking about apartments, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Then how many apartments can you get on an acre?
it'd be the same in 22.
It's 22 units per acre, think of them in units.
So 2,000 square feet of land per unit.
Okay.
Talk about two-story, or,
Yeah,
three,
it's
yeah.
pretty low.
Yeah, it's pretty low. It's not very aggressive.
Right. Our proposal would expand townhomes into the R5 zone and retain them in the R3.5 zone. So we'd also be clarifying the dimensional standards, updating the density limits to match the dimensions, and generally results in a slightly higher permitted density of townhouses to take advantage of their narrow width. Manufactured homes, is
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of,
Well, I'm going to ask one more question about
Sure.
that before we move on. So what about going higher? I mean,
three-story?
like 4 or 5 stories. There are 3-story apartments here now. Forest Ridge is a 3-story complex. There are several others.
Oh, 3 stories.
But I could see in some geographically well-located areas where we could go 4 or 5 stories that it wouldn't impact the neighborhood. Is that a consideration?
yeah, I think so.
But it's probably more of a factor of
Building codes.
of the density rather than the height, right?
Yeah, I think so.
At 22 units per acre, you're probably not driving 4 and 5 story,
Right.
because you can't get enough units, right? So,
But my point is if we're trying to increase the housing supply in a limited footprint, then maybe we need to change the density requirements. Maybe we have an R1 zone that allows you to do that, and we specifically place those in places where we would get the least amount of pushback from. And because the more units you put on an acre, the more cost effective it becomes for a builder to build, like Rob Justice or somebody who's actually building commercial low-income housing.
Right.
If we had some of those spots, we could probably recruit some of those people to build here.
right, that would drive it.
So I just want to point, yeah, if we did have an R1 zone, we'd be changing the zoning map. And what we're doing with this project is just allowing different uses in the existing zones. So, just a
But,
consideration.
as part of your recommendations, you could add those as options for a commission to consider.
Consider, yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
or do density bonuses in some areas.
or density bonus.
Like, for instance, if you're looking at additional height, it might be less objectionable to put these up against a hill so that you don't have the privacy issue of people in a very high place looking down into single family, but they have like a wooded backdrop. And especially if it's on an arterial that might have bus service, like Lynn Avenue or Malal Avenue, or, places where there's access to services.
Well, if you look at Barkley Hills, the Barkley Hills Apartments or Forest Edge, those could have easily been 5-story units that wouldn't have impacted anybody anywhere, and they're only, you're 2 or 3 blocks from Law Avenue and a bus stop. You know, and there's some stuff down farther in the canyon, and probably a lot of stuff that we might be able to do as far as increased height when we go out Beaver Creek Road. Because a lot of that's going to be backing onto what, at least for the time being, is going to be unincorporated Clackamas County, so it's either going to be farm or forest. It's not going to be, you know, large plots of residential.
And it's a nicer amenity for the residents.
Well, it's interesting too that years ago we were thinking about this, because look at Berkeley Hills and the duplexes, a lot of multifamily down in that area, that we were thinking about this at that time. Sounds like, you know, about density and things like that. So, and Berkeley Hills is a really good example. I mean, that is dense, you know, it's pretty tight down there and stuff. So I don't know, when was that done? That was, you know.
It's been done in the early 70s. I lived in one of the duplexes in Forest Edge. It was pretty quiet. I liked it.
Okay, manufactured home parks. We have 4 within the city limit, and about 6 within the urban growth boundary. It's about 400 units of our housing stock, and it provides a really good affordable option for people. The economics and the current zoning you can't do a new park in the R3.5 zone. It's not a permitted use. So they're all zoned R3.5. The main question is how to manage these existing parks. And so what we're proposing is to make them a permitted use in the R3.5 zone. That would allow them to make modifications without extensive planning review and possibly add more units as well. There's a set of design standards that we're proposing with these, so that they have amenities, open space, and that sort of thing.
So these are not the mobile home parks of the 1960s, where basically people are pulling a trailer, and these are actual manufactured homes that are either single wide or double wide and put together. Do they take the trucks off?
Yeah, they would be required either I think they're required to put a skirting around them based on state regulations, or put them on blocks on the foundation.
Yeah, they got a foundation.
So there's a lot of state regulations of the parks, not just the units. So we would have local standards designed to align with those state standards rather than duplicating them.
Okay.
Can we go back to that? At our table, there was someone that was really knowledgeable about the manufactured homes, and they said that the rent might be $850 a month to rent the land, and you buy the manufactured home for something like $80,000, but it does not appreciate. So initially, it might be an affordable option, but over the long term, the owner is not building equity, so it's not an ideal situation.
Right.
What about, could you have the situation where people were able to buy their land and put a mobile home or a manufactured home on it? And if you set it on a real foundation, to be honest, I did some, I built a couple of office structures that went up to the oil fields in Alaska. That we did, it was a company over in Herbstman, and I wired them for fire alarms. And they're, for all intents and purposes, built exactly like a stick-built house. I mean,
They are.
you know,
These new ones are.
all the
You
insulation.
can build one of these in any single-family zone as well.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to allow that. It's a state law.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that solves that issue then.
Thanks. Good point. So this is formally what we're calling a multiplex would currently be called a multifamily unit, but we're talking about adding this concept as a 3 to 4 unit development permitted outright in the R5 and R3/5 zone. So this type of unit could be side by side, similar to a townhouse, but on a single lot. It could be 3 single detached units, like a mini cottage project. It would be a subset of multifamily development codes. But the idea is that it wouldn't necessarily have to go through site plan and design review in order to build one. Yeah,
So, for example, Monroe and Eighth, there's a set of three or four that got built on where that one house burned down.
Yeah.
Those are there are 3 or 4 cottages there.
There's four there, yeah.
It says the peanut gallery, so.
Yeah,
Planner did it.
that went through site plan design review, so it was a more extensive process. So this would allow the 3 and 4 units in the R3.5 and the R5 zone. So with design standards, you get a little bit more density and some of those medium density. Right now, in medium density residential, it is very similar to single family. It's just you get attached housing in R3.5. So this whole project looks at, for medium density residential, R5 and R3.5, how do we allow more housing types in there?
Yeah.
So as you're talking about the zoning, is there a possibility to allow existing larger lots to be subdivided to smaller lots as infill?
Certainly. Yeah, so somebody could read the dimensional standards for one of these new unit types and propose a land division that allowed for a variety of these unit types, and that sort of thing, yeah.
In existing neighborhoods?
In an existing neighborhood, assuming the parcels were big enough, yeah.
Okay.
So if a new subdivision comes in, Pete, I mean, can they, like, for instance, that top one there, they could actually come in and do something like that in a new subdivision, and would it be multifamily just for that lot and the rest, everything else is R6, or are you taking lot by lot?
Well, we're proposing this for the R5 and R3.5 zones, so those are not the single-family low-density zones, those are the
Okay.
medium-density zones, yeah.
I don't know, we might want to consider a sprinkling in new R6 zones to be able to have
Well, that's what
some.
we're talking, yeah, these, we're looking at, we've talked about having these different, diverse kind of residential.
So everyone isn't exactly, it's
Right.
like the old Smelser development where there were 2 models and there's 50
know, it's
houses and they all look
it just-
exactly the same.
It just becomes kind of a nightmare for planning, trying to, oh, wait, that was gonna be, that's, R2.5,
Yeah, I'm gonna
that's
talk
gonna be
about-
R6, and that's.
I'm going to talk about the possibility of amending our master plan process to allow more flexibility, so,
Okay.
for residential.
But that's, it's a great idea, I think,
Yeah.
having diversified in, because we've talked about a little bit in these subdivisions that, trying to get a different
Mix.
feel inside these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So currently, we have what's called cottage housing, and we're proposing changing that to say cluster housing, because the design idea is essentially the same. You have a set of smaller units gathered around a central open space with shared parking, shared utilities, and shared maintenance. And a very popular idea, very popular with the project advisory team and the public, but very little of this has been constructed in Oregon City. Currently reviewing one development for 5
Unless you go
years.
back to the 1870s,
Right.
Kenema was certainly that. So is pretty much all of the south end of McLaughlin. Those are all pretty small houses on small lots.
Well, these are all on one parcel.
Okay.
Yeah, but potentially you could allow these to be fee simple as well.
And so you have one of those in Kenema right now that,
Yeah, it's 5 units on 2 parcels, because they have to have at least 10,000 square feet of property to do this on a single-family zone, yeah.
But
So-
they got beat up by the by the Historic Review Board.
We'll try not to talk about it just in case you see an appeal.
Okay.
Yep.
So are these,
That's funny.
are these,
Step in for Carrie since she's not up here.
Good point.
so are
Okay.
these cottage houses, and if they're on one lot, are they primarily rentals, or are they condos? or what's the ownership structure?
I don't know what the ownership model is, but they are required to have an HOA type model, so I'm thinking they're like a condo. And they're potentially,
Or theoretically, they could be a rental managed by a
Sure.
property management.
sure, they could be by a maintenance or management company, yeah, that's right. And that is a current requirement of the code, is that there be a maintenance organization or management company that manages the common area. Yeah.
But I think you could see this, let's just say this became something you would partnered with the county, maybe the county owns the land, allow people to buy into the equity of the home, then they can sell the home and take the equity out of the home while keeping the land in a trust. I mean, so there's a lot of models where you could utilize this.
Yeah, and that could keep the,
That builds equity to buy into a home in the.
and keeps the prices down at the same time, because you're not buying the real estate, you're just buying the building.
The structure.
So I'm going to skip through the residential zones and get to the other zones real quick. Basically, for the higher density zones, when I'm saying high density zones, I'm talking about R2 and the commercial and mixed use zones. Currently, commercial and mixed use zones allow multifamily to be built exclusively. There's no requirement that you also mix commercial uses. There may be some concern that it would push out potential commercial redevelopment, but the market has not indicated that that is the case. So we're not proposing any changes to that policy. With respect to the design standards for multifamily, which by that we would mean 5 or more units on a parcel, we're looking at simplifying some of the articulation standards and the architectural detailing requirements, and taking out the mandate for a mixture of bedrooms types, because that's really something that the market would dictate, rather than prescribing 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, which is what our code currently does.
So you're saying that in the current code, there is a percentage of each of those 3 types that has to be built inside a development?
Yeah, once you get over a certain number of units, 50 units, yeah, but that would go
50
away.
or 15?
50, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would not apply at all anymore. We're also looking at this zone, at the R2 zone, to actually offer a 20% bonus option for projects that are affordable to those 80% median family income or less, which would be more of a standard type of, subsidy, or it wouldn't be a subsidy, it would be a density bonus for those types of projects, and it would be easier for the city to administer that than.
So when you say a 20% bonus option, so if you have 21.8 units, you could get 20% more units?
Yeah, and you could either go higher or just add them in with the existing height limit. Mm-hmm. Okay, gets to the original idea of mixing up a development. Looking at ways to get more creative subdivisions, get a greater variety of residential uses, so mixing together apartments, cluster homes, single-family homes. And that would involve making the existing master plan process, which is a type 3 quasi-judicial planning commission review. That would become a more robust, flexible, and more attuned to residential uses, because currently it's kind of tailored to institutional uses and it doesn't have a lot of standards for residential. It would be similar to our old planned development process, which we no longer have on the books. With this, as we understand, we've been asked to look at the provisions for lot averaging with fresh eyes and involving the project advisory team to see how those lot averaging provisions can add more creative housing options and greater variety while preserving the character of those neighborhoods.
As we talk about much more higher density, you also need to provide open space, or else they just aren't livable. And you create social problems because of that. So if you allow multiple stories, allow room for more green space.
Certainly, yeah, when talking about larger developments, that's going to need to be a critical component of any planned unit development or master plan. In fact,
So this thing on the bottom right, is that a concept of the Beaver Creek area, or?
Where is that? It's a project that's actually been constructed.
In Southern Oregon.
Yeah, it's in Southern Oregon, and it's got all sorts of things. It's, row houses, on the left side, the lower density, you can see single family, more traditional. In the orange areas, you've got a lot of row house type things. You've got what are called courtyard buildings and courtyard apartments, or plexes, 5 units and that sort of thing. Central open space and a very sort of traditional but radial grid there and abutting an open space area. So next steps for us are coming up June. We'll have our final documents with all of the proposals drafted, and we're asking our project advisory team in June 1st to provide some recommendations to Planning Commission and City Commission. And then we'll spend the summer drafting the final plan and starting with Planning Commission and City Commission public hearings in the fall. We have a project website with a mailing list, and the web address is here. And this is where I wrap it up. If you wanted some additional statistics about the current housing stock and affordability, I've got a couple of extra slides I could show you, but if not, we can move on. Yeah, and we also have some examples of our informational materials that we'll be planning to produce for each of the unit types. So.
One of the things I'd like to hear ultimately with the final recommendations is what kind of incentives, what kind of best practices are out there to actually make things happen on the ground. I mean, these are beautiful pictures, but we want it to happen. So if there are SDC waivers or construction exercise tax or density bonuses or whatever those tools are that we know have been successful in other communities, I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, great, yeah.
I think that rolls right into a funding option for some of these.
Hang on, how long is it gonna take?
12 minutes or less.
Well, here's the deal. I really would prefer to have everybody here for this discussion.
Okay.
I think this is gonna be enough of a controversial thing that I wanna have everybody here to have the talk and then be able to, talk about it. Because I know that I have some serious questions that are gonna take more than 12 minutes to answer. So let's push this off to the next one.
Yep.
And do we have anything else?
We just wanted to let you know that, once, or Laura was saying that, we'll be bringing this back to you in another work session once we have a final some ideas from the committee and start that process. So you'll get to see this again in a work session.
Okay.
Over the summer.
All right, yeah, that's good.
This PowerPoint's going to be available on the website.
All right, then if we don't have anything else, we'll adjourn and be back at 7 for the regular meeting.